In my last video, I purchased this 21-inch iMac from mid-2011 for just $100. And today, I'm going to double that investment and give it some much-needed upgrades. This is the last of the truly upgradable iMacs. Sure, the new 27-inch iMacs have easy access RAM hatches, and technically you can upgrade the RAM and storage on any of the iMacs since 2012. But this one makes everything available. Not only is there a RAM hatch on the bottom, the display is not adhered to the case, which makes upgrading the hard drive, CPU, and even the graphics a much easier task. So that's exactly what I did. With just $100 to spend in upgrades, I decided to start by tackling the RAM and storage. I picked up a cheap 240GB SSD for $24 and snagged two 2GB RAM chips for $8. Because this iMac has 4 RAM slots and had 4GB in it already, I only needed to buy an additional 4GB of RAM to bring us up to a very usable 8. Installing the SSD was also a very easy process. You just need to unscrew the 8 screws mounting the display, unplug a few connectors, and then remove the 3.5-inch drive that is currently in the iMac. While I was in there, I also removed the optical drive to improve the cooling somewhat. This doesn't really take more than 5 or 6 minutes in total, and because I installed macOS before I put the SSD in, it booted right up straight away. Once I had this squared away, it was time to move on to my biggest upgrade. When I set out to make this project, I had to choose whether I wanted to upgrade the CPU or the GPU. My budget didn't really allow for both. I decided that since the 6000 series AMD GPU is known to fail, and the Core i5 was really fine for most tasks, graphics were the way to go. With $131 spent already, I purchased an NVIDIA GTX 765M off of eBay for $70. Okay, yes, I know, I spent $201 on this machine, which technically means that I failed, but I'm just gonna go ahead and call it close enough. Now, the reason you can upgrade these older iMacs is because they use MXM GPUs, which aren't particularly common anymore and really never were, but they are used in this machine, and because they're standard, you can upgrade them with the cards that you can get out of certain gaming laptops that shipped with them. Now, you can't buy these directly from NVIDIA because they're all OEM and they would go to laptop manufacturers primarily, so you have to buy them pretty much from someone who's pulled them out of a laptop. Now, I didn't film the GPU upgrade process because, quite frankly, it was a mess. It took me about 2 hours to get everything fitting properly, and I ended up having to completely disassemble the iMac and pull the board out and pull a whole bunch of stuff out. And basically the issue that I ran into was these iMacs use MXM Type A, which is shorter than the more standard MXM Type B cards that most MXM cards really are. So I had to get a little bit creative because while there's really nothing that stops you from putting a Type B card in there, there can be some issues depending on the card with clearance. So the issue that I ran into was one of the metal mounting brackets was bumping into the graphics card, which of course is taller and was therefore interfering and wouldn't let me seat the motherboard in properly. So I had to make a really tough decision here, guys. I really didn't want to do this, but basically what I ended up doing was grabbing a pair of pliers and just bending the bracket until it snapped out. I feel terrible. I didn't want to do it, but there was no other way because, well, first of all, I didn't need the bracket anymore because I have an SSD now and it's a lot smaller, so didn't need the bracket. And also, I couldn't unscrew the bracket because it was attached to the whole hinge and chassis assembly, so you can't just unscrew it because you'd have to take the hinge out and then you wouldn't be able to have a hinge and a stand on the iMac. And then it would just be an Apple Pro Display XDR, and who wants that? Stale jokes aside, it did hurt me to have to twist off a piece of the frame of this computer. I really wish I didn't have to do it, but this computer was $200 all in, so for the sake of the experiment, I had to get it done. At this point in the process, I was about 100,000% sure I had broken the machine entirely, simply from the manhandling it took to get everything to fit together. So when I plugged it in, I really was expecting the worst. Okay, so at this point I'm exhausted. I do not have high hopes for what's about to happen, so really, I guess here goes nothing. It's just... What? Did that just chime? That's encouraging. But now, can we get the display? Come on. Oh, what the fuck? When I booted it up, miraculously, I had life. I have no idea how I pulled it off. I was sure that this thing was going to be completely ruined, but it worked instantly with no hesitation. It turned on in mere seconds. The improvements were already clear. But then I noticed something else. Okay, that's odd. So it's reading as NVIDIA GeForce GTX 770M 3GB, but I put a 765 in here, so I think it's probably reading the BIOS, the VBIOS of the card wrong, and in displaying as a 770. That's probably what's going on. I'm just happy it all works at all. As I continued to test and make sure that everything was working, this continued to nag at me. What card did I actually put in this iMac? Of course, now it was inside, I didn't want to pull everything apart, so I started looking for clues online when I noticed that in all of the articles about the 765M, there were 2 empty VRAM pads on the front of the card. I could have sworn mine had 4. So I checked the eBay listing I bought, and sure enough, there were 4 VRAM chips on the front of the card. But then came the damning evidence. I looked at the reverse photo and noticed the model number printed on the label, 770. Sure enough, I went out hunting for one of the least expensive US-based GTX 765Ms to fit my budget, and I happened across a seller who didn't know what he had and ended up with a 770. In fact, I actually considered putting a 770M in this iMac, but decided against it once I found that they were all going for about $120 to $150 on eBay. Now, this might also be why I had some trouble getting my logic board to seat properly in the machine, as I haven't heard the same issue happen with people who have used a GTX 765M. So as for some tips for graphics card upgrades, if you're going to be tackling that in a 2011 iMac, definitely stick for the GTX 7 series cards, as those were used in the late 2013 and mid 2014 series of iMacs, so they work right out of the box. All you have to do is get one that was pulled from an Alienware laptop, and you just plug it in and it'll turn right on. Obviously without boot screen or brightness controls, but it works right out of the box, so who can really complain? So after all of my upgrades, how does it compare to the stock configuration? Well, one thing I've noticed for sure is the cooling. Ditching a 3.5-inch drive for a much smaller SSD and removing the optical drive to allow better airflow has improved the cooling a lot, and I haven't run into any issues with the 770 sucking too much power or generating too much heat compared to the old card. The entire iMac is running about 15 to 20 degrees cooler than it was before, which is pretty counterintuitive when you consider that I put in a more power-hungry card and I'm running at full display brightness all the time. Curiously, my CPU performance has also improved after my upgrades. Cinebench R20 jumped from 734 to 756. And Geekbench 4 multi-core scores have jumped from 7,539 to 8,369. Keep in mind, I didn't change the CPU or even reapply the thermal paste. This is all based on the cooling improvements alone. Now, these aren't huge performance gains, only about 3% in Cinebench and 11% in Geekbench, but it really goes to show how much airflow can improve your performance. Graphics are where we see the real gains, however. The 770 absolutely smashes the AMD 6750M by huge amounts. Geekbench compute scores leapt from 4,794 to 25,569, a whopping 5.3 times increase, and Unigine Heaven went from just 59 all the way to 298, a 5-fold increase. I'm not really planning on using this machine for anything super demanding, but this card with its 3GB of VRAM means the OS runs buttery smooth, and there's really no reason why you couldn't get through a 1080p timeline or play some lighter titles such as Portal 2 on this device. Now, as usual with all of my projects, I'll have links in the description below to the resources and any applicable parts that I used in this project if you want to follow along and do this for yourself. As far as the graphics upgrade goes and would I recommend doing it, I would say yes, but you have to be aware of what you're going to get yourself into, especially with these 21-inch iMacs, because you can run into issues with power delivery. These things only have a 205 watt power supply, so there's not a ton of power to go around. Overall, I'm incredibly happy with my final build. We are running a Core i5-2400S, 8GB of RAM, 240GB solid state drive, and a GTX 770M on a 1080p display, and the whole package only costs $201. Sure, the upgrade process was a bit of a hassle, but this is definitely one of the best value iMacs out there. If you wanted to get similar performance in a stock iMac, you'd have to go for the late 2013 top-end model, which comes with 8GB of RAM, a quad-core i5-4570S, and NVIDIA GT 750M graphics with 1GB of VRAM. Now, not only are the graphics in those inferior to the 770M that I have, those things also cost about $400 or more, so double what I paid. So that'll do it for today's video on the iMac Einstein Lite. I'm actually super excited about how this thing turned out. It starts up really fast, it's super snappy, it turned out really well. So definitely make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Was this worth it? Was this worth doing, or should I have just spent more money and gotten a machine that worked out of the box? And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LukeMiani. Please consider joining my subreddit if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.